When a dismissive avoidant flirts with someone else, it feels like a betrayal and a complete invalidation. But it can also feel confusing and worrisome, leaving you thinking, when and where should I actually be drawing the line? So in today's video, we are going to break this down in a lot of detail. We're going to talk first and foremost a little bit about why this is actually happening from a dismissive avoidant perspective. Then we're going to dive into what to do if you are on the receiving end of this. And then if you're into this stuff, we'll talk about this really cool overlap between neuroscience and ancient wisdom in a non-dogmatic way. And most importantly, we'll talk about how to heal from this painful event and ensure that it doesn't happen again. Let's start with the patterns of the dismissive avoidant. Dismissive avoidants often flirt with other people as a way of keeping their emotional distance. It is a form of a deactivation strategy, a way of essentially creating space and distance emotionally and psychologically between themselves and another person. And this is usually because intimacy and closeness to a dismissive avoidant feels threatening. So outside attention becomes a bit of an escape and a way to regulate themselves. Again, I'm not saying this is okay or appropriate at all. We are going to dive into what you can actually do and how to respond to this, I promise you, in just a few moments. The second theme or pattern here is essentially that flirting can be subconscious at times for dismissive avoidants. In other words, they may not fully recognize or register how it's impacting somebody else, which is part of why you absolutely have to talk about it, address it, set a boundary, and we'll talk about how to do that in a few moments. But the third point is that dismissive avoidants don't necessarily typically intend to provoke jealousy in their partner, but at times this can be a theme. They can think, oh, I want to see how my partner would react to something like this. And it can be an indirect way of testing either whether or not the person is interested in them and a way to sort of validate that. But more often than not, it's less that and more their way of testing how their partner will respond to them flirting with somebody else. And if they're going to have a healthy conversation or if they're going to overreact and get really jealous and things like that. Now, I want to be really clear here. Of course, if you're in a relationship and your partner's flirting with you in front of somebody else, it's not healthy. It's not acceptable. It's not what securely attached people do. So just because we're addressing these themes and patterns doesn't mean that we're justifying them. I just think it's helpful to understand the relationship to things first. And we're going to get into all of the other approaches to take after this. Now, research from the University of Arizona shows that having a secure connection to somebody, an actual healthy connection, is something that dampens threat responses in the brain. So without this secure attachment dynamic, witnessing flirting behaviors is going to spike your cortisol levels and stress circuits significantly more than if a secure person was on the receiving end of this. And again, a secure person would not address their partner flirting with somebody in front of them in a way where they brushed it under the rug or made it okay. But I just think it's important to acknowledge from a neuroscience perspective that if you're insecurely attached, this is even going to be that much more excruciating to be on the receiving end of. Dopamine studies by a scientist named Kent Burridge revealed that novelty-seeking activities are things that activated the reward system. And for dismissive avoidance, flirting often reflects this dopamine pursuit rather than genuine replacement, but it still doesn't make it okay. So what do you do if you are on the receiving end of this? How should you actually approach this and address this kind of behavior in a relationship? And is it okay ever? Well, we're going to talk about that. Here's the first thing, and I'm going to give you 3 steps in real time to address this should this pattern come up in your relationship. The very first thing is you want to regulate yourself before speaking, because a lot of times when you're feeling distressed about something, and rightfully so, what ends up taking place is your distress comes across in your intonation, so in the way that you speak. And it makes it, unfortunately, an easy target for somebody who doesn't want to dive into an emotional situation to say, oh, you're being too emotional, and sort of to put the dynamic back on you rather than to truly hear what you're saying and honor your boundaries and what you're experiencing. So the very first thing is you want to practice a form of somatic processing. And this is the form of practicing being mindful about what's taking place in your body as your emotions come up. So for example, if you are feeling really angry, or if you're feeling hurt or frustrated, you want to actually try to label the emotion and notice what sensations in your body accompany these emotions. So for example, if you feel angry, you might be like, oh my gosh, I feel anger. And that's a clenching of my jaw and a tightness in my shoulder blades and a clenching of my fists and sort of knots in my stomach and heat across my chest and down my arms. And you don't have to think of all of those different sensations to be clear. You can just try to notice and really witness 1 or 2. And neuroscience actually shows us in that case as well that doing that actually reduces activity in the amygdala and allows you to calm your nerves and your fears when you partake in that exercise. So take a moment to do that first, and that will just allow you to be more regulated in this situation. And then what I want you to do second is to address this head on. And I know sometimes people in relationships can move from a place of fear, can move from a place of, oh, if I address this, they're going to think that I'm jealous or clingy and I don't want them to think this about me. But I want to be really clear here that if you do not address these things, you are abandoning yourself, and it is a form of self-silencing that will cause you to literally reignite or recreate more attachment wounding in your own subconscious mind. So we have to address this. And I want to be clear about one other thing. You get respect in relationships and care and commitment from people in relationships when you're willing to show up and protect and respect yourself. And honestly, dismissive avoidance will come around and appreciate and respect you more if you address it. Whereas if you don't say anything head on in a clear, direct, and regulated way, then they'll often allow that to just enable the behavior and continue through those patterns a lot of the time. If you want to dive more deeply into a course that really helps repair this literally for free, you can check it out fully for free for 7 days, which is more than enough time to finish this course. And just for a limited time, you actually get the How to Heal from a Breakup course for free for life. So you get to keep that one literally for free. It's a gift, a giveaway. But you can dive in and you can actually check out and work through the workbook and materials, our course called Overcoming Jealousy and Repairing Broken Trust. And it's a really powerful course that outlines in more detail the steps you can take, how to communicate, how to deal with trust issues in a relationship head on, so that you can either heal and fix them or you know when it's time to go. So that just details out everything in so much more detail than I can put in this short video. So I want you to, in step 2 here, set a boundary. I'll tell you a secret about boundary setting here. The best way to set a boundary is to be very strong in your language, but very calm in your tone. So the moment you get dysregulated, somebody's going to be like, oh, look, you're the one that's angry. Oh, look, you're overreacting. If instead you go to somebody and you say, hey, I feel like there's some flirting going on, and for me, this is completely unacceptable. I'm not interested in participating in dynamics like this in a relationship, so it needs to stop. And if you say it in that way with that tone, you're standing up for yourself. You're honoring yourself and your truth. And then this brings me to point number 3, which is you get to vet how they respond. If this person responds and they continue the behavior and they continue doing it on evenings out or in front of you or just on an ongoing basis, then you stop setting a boundary in the situation and you set a full-time permanent boundary with the person by stepping away from the relationship, because otherwise you're allowing this type of cycle to continue. But a lot of times you're going to see a positive response by just having a regulated tone, using really clear and specific language, and articulating your boundary in that way. And we're going to dive into another topic here in just a second in this video, so don't leave just yet. But another thing you can do is you can dive into something called an asking for empathy statement. It's something we talk a lot about in all of our courses at PDS, where we talk about the importance of being able to get somebody to see where you're at if they're not naturally doing it. And this can look like you saying, hey, if I were flirting with somebody in front of you, how would you feel that demonstrates my level of respect towards you? What you're doing is you're literally asking them to put themselves in your shoes by painting the picture out for them. And it actually is something that is very effective, especially with dismissive avoidance, because it allows them to truly put themselves in your shoes. But even when it comes to where neuroscience meets ancient wisdom, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna literally says, be in integrity without attachment. And what this is essentially referring to is that you have to be the one to be free to communicate and set limits without being bound to the outcome. In other words, you want to be in a place where you can be in integrity to yourself and honor your boundaries, honor your truth as a person, and know that, hey, I might not get the outcome I'm looking for. I might get an outcome where somebody doesn't respond well and they keep flirting anyways. But by staying in integrity in the relationship to yourself, you are then filtering out the people that don't belong in your life. It is still a win-win for you. Either the person heals and grows and shows up, or the relationship doesn't move in that direction, and then you're not bound to a situation that's not healthy for you. And even in John 8:32, Jesus says the truth will set you free. And this really depicts that clarity in communication and you standing in your truth is something that liberates you. And I believe that when you stand in your natural truth and focus on that, instead of being attached to outcomes, you free yourself and actually set your future on the right path. So all in all, you see that neuroscience tells us this, you see that ancient wisdom tells us this, and those are definitely the steps I would take from a psychological standpoint in regards to how to communicate and address this going forward, so you do not end up caught in the situation without the power to change the dynamic as you see fit. So that's it for today. If you enjoyed today's video, please like, share, subscribe to this channel. And again, you can check out those 2 free courses, one that you get to keep as a giveaway for life, using the link down below. Thanks for watching.